Good morning or good afternoon, 49er faithful, depending on which coast you find yourself on. It's still morning here on the West Coast, but my special guest today hails from the East Coast, coming in from Atlanta. Today, I am very pleased to welcome in an Atlanta insider for this interview, Aaron Freeman from Locked On Falcons. Aaron, how are you doing this fine day?
I'm doing better. I saw that intro video. It seemed to be a stiff arming of a New Orleans Saint, so I feel even better coming on the show.
Yes, that is a proud moment in 49er faithful history. Thankfully, I was there in New Orleans for that. Seated next to some very kind Saints fans, enjoying the game from the stands, and just lost my mind when George Kittle was able to do that with those Saints defenders. So much so that I went out and made an entire t-shirt out of it that I gave to my entire family. I happen to have one here because I gave it away on my channel. But Furious George was born from that moment. It was amazing. Yes, I'm sure that anytime the Saints are taken for a ride, that's a positive thing in your book.
Absolutely.
Nice. Well, I know that you recently released a joint podcast with the San Francisco 49ers Locked On crew, because you are a part of the Locked On family. Great series of podcasts. And that was joining Eric Crocker and Brian Peacock. I'm a big fan of Crocky. He's going to be on the channel in the near future. Phenomenal guy. Were they kind in that exchange? Did that podcast go well?
Eric treated me well. Brian, not so much, but they both treat me well. They didn't treat the Falcons particularly well.
Right. I heard the start of it where Brian led in with a shot against the Falcons, and I backed out at that point. I didn't want to pollute our interview, so I'll go back and listen to it this afternoon. Hopefully some of the viewers will as well. It's a great podcast. We are a bit more respectful of Atlanta on this program. I definitely do not think that it's going to be a walk-away game for the 49ers. I'm a bit concerned about this game and how it sets up. So let's get into it from the start. In looking at Atlanta's defense and their resurgent nature, since getting beat badly in Dallas, the Falcons defense has only allowed more than 21 points once against Tampa Bay. No surprise there. Other than that blip, the defense started to find itself. They've had interceptions in 4 straight games. The defense went from only 8 interceptions in the first 10 games total to 7 turnovers in the last 4 games. In your opinion, Aaron, how is the defense trending going into Sunday's game?
It is definitely trending up, and you pointed out some of the elements why. It's largely due to their ability to turn the ball over. They've gotten 2 consecutive pick sixes the past 2 weeks against Tampa Bay and last week against Carolina. They both came from their 2020 draft class, and Marlon Davidson against Tampa Bay, and then last week with Michael Walker. And so the hope is that streak can continue with their 2020 draft class maybe coming through for them. AJ Terrell's been playing at a Pro Bowl level, their first round pick that year. And now their other 4th round pick alongside Michael Walker and Jalen Hawkins is going to get his first true start at the safety position, replacing Eric Harris, who went down with a torn pectoral muscle at the beginning of that Carolina game. So the truth of the Falcons is that they are able to make some more plays in coverage. This is still a defense that hasn't been consistent stopping the run. They've been better as of late. They got gashed several weeks ago by the Panthers to 200 yards in that game. And since then, they've been better, but they haven't been great stopping the run. They're not a team that can rush the quarterback that much, but it's really been their ability to make plays in coverage led by AJ Terrell and getting some of those turnovers on the back end that has allowed this defense to be a lot more of a bend but don't break unit, and being able to create some key plays that can get some stops for them against some decent offenses the last couple of weeks.
I appreciate that insight, and that's great information. How do you see it setting up for the 49ers attacking Atlanta in their weak spots? You mentioned specifically their run defense. Obviously, San Francisco has been attempting to really drive home their identity as a run-first team, everything really setting up for San Francisco off of that run-first offense. Do you think that the 49ers will be able to have some sustained success with both Deebo Samuel, hopefully Elijah Mitchell coming back this week, but if not, Jeff Wilson Jr. going up against that front 7?
Yeah, I think the 49ers have the advantage. It's just really a question of, do they have a little success, and that allows them to set up the rest of their offense through the air, or do they have a lot of success? And obviously, from the Falcons' perspective, you just want to minimize as much success as they can on those early down runs, so that they don't get into some third and manageable situations where they'll have easy targets and easy conversions there, given the Falcons' struggles to provide pressure. One of the ways the Falcons are trying to do that is with blitzes, but they haven't had a lot of success getting home. They've had a little bit more success these last couple of weeks, and maybe that's a part of the reason why their defense is trending up. That pick six they had it last week against Carolina came on a blitz where Cam Newton had pressure in his face and didn't see a defender dropping into the throwing lane, and that led to Michael Walker picking that off. So you see a little bit more plays like that, and so obviously if the Falcons can get the 49ers into third and long situations, that will be beneficial for them to be able to die up more plays like that, and maybe get Jimmy Garoppolo to do the things that, at least from afar, I've seen Jimmy Garoppolo do from time to time, which is like he's hot for a moment, but then you're going to get at least one really horrible throw that's either going to get picked off or dropped by a defender every week. So hopefully the Falcons can take advantage of that.
Yeah, he has the ability to really put it in the breadbasket for a linebacker. It is something to behold at times, no question about it. So you mentioned the pass rush, and as I looked at it, it really did stand out to me that other than Dante Fowler, who's not lighting the world on fire, but has 4.5 sacks, a respectable season so far, no one else on the team really with more than 2 sacks at this point. Are there really any other consistent pass rush threats aside from Dante Fowler? Is anyone getting significant pressure and just not getting those closing sacks?
Yeah, it's really been Grady Jarrett that he's the only guy that's been getting any reliable pressure. And, these last couple of weeks going up against some favorable matchups on the interior, you haven't really seen him getting home that much. And some of that is owed to the fact that teams know that he's the only pass rusher that you really have to defend. And you're seeing a lot more instances where, he's getting a lot more Aaron Donald treatment, not necessarily because he's playing at the same level that Aaron Donald is, but basically offenses know that if we can just block this one guy, we don't really have a whole lot to fear from this Falcons pass rush, other than the occasional play that Dante Fowler will make, maybe like once or twice a game, which has been the case for him. He just has not necessarily lived up to the expectations when the Falcons paid him a lot of money last offseason. So while he is leading the team in sacks, it's not because he's been a consistent and reliable pass rusher. It's just basically, he'll get that production, every now and then, or whatever the case may be. So it's basically the Grady Jarrett show. And if you can get him blocked, double teamed, then, you don't really have that much to worry about from the Falcons pass rush, unless your team particularly struggles against blocking pressure or when the Falcons blitz.
It will be interesting to see how that sets up for the 49ers. Strong interior pressure can be their Achilles heel. They have some inane ability to block Aaron Donald. Daniel Brunskill just happens to step it up every time they play the Rams. I don't know what it is. But certainly against the Chiefs in that 2019 Super Bowl, that highlighted what interior pressure can do to Jimmy Garoppolo. When it's directly in his face, he's just not very mobile as a quarterback, and therefore he suffers as soon as that pocket collapses in front of him. I would look for the 49ers to have a lot of double teams on Grady Jarrett and hope that on the edges we can contain Dante Fowler. You mentioned the injury to starting safety Eric Harris, who will be out, thereby allowing for a fresh start at safety. How does that impact the otherwise seemingly surging Atlanta defense? Does that play a big role going into Sunday?
It could. Eric Harris is by no means a world beater. I'm sure maybe 49ers fans are a little bit familiar with him, given the last couple of years playing with the Raiders. And he wasn't great for the Raiders the last couple of years being thrust into a starting lineup. But he's been better this year over Atlanta. He's been sort of the thing that I've talked about quite a bit on Locked On Falcons, is he's sort of embodied the do your job mantra that Dean Pease preaches, that stems from his time in New England with Bill Belichick, and that sort of being their mantra of just basically being in the right position, not making mistakes, those sorts of things. And that's what Eric Harris has been for them. And particularly as of late, he has been asked to be more of a matchup guy going in one-on-one coverage when the Falcons have upped their man coverage the last couple of weeks, because they have struggled, when you can't pressure with 4,
Right.
playing zone is not necessarily a good strategy. And so the
No, it
Falcons
is not.
are trying to basically, up their man coverage, because that's basically the only way their defense can be kind of functional and taking advantage of, the presence of a player like AJ Terrell on the back end. But that's forced Eric Harris to have to cover some of these top end tight ends going up against Tampa Bay, against Rob Gronkowski, New England against Hunter Henry. And that's not really the strength of Eric Harris's game. Now, fortunately, I think Jalen Hawkins probably has a little bit more athleticism in that regard. So while I'm not going to sit here and feel like he's going to do a great job against George Kittle this weekend, I do feel like he probably stands a better chance against George Kittle than maybe Eric Harris would in those sort of one-on-one situations. But the drawback of having Jalen Hawkins, a second-year player, is that his play has been a little bit more inconsistent from that sort of mental element of essentially do your job. And there was a number of plays last week against Carolina where he was out of position on that pick 6. He had gotten beat by the running back in that man coverage on an angle route. And fortunately, Michael Walker was there to step into the throwing lane and pick it off. But had he not been there, that could have been a big play for that. And so that's kind of the inconsistency of youth. And so while Jalen Hawkins, I think, in certain elements may represent an upgrade over Eric Harris as a starter, there may be some other elements that he may not do as well. And that certainly, given the quality of the tight end that the 49ers have, could spell trouble for this Falcons defense.
That will be a matchup to watch. Hawkins against George Kittle, especially with the resurgence of George Kittle in the past couple of weeks. He had been very quiet so far this year, other than getting into the red zone targets, which historically was not something that Kittle got. I mean, he was lights out in yards after the catch, and minimal in touchdowns. This year it has been that reversal. And then the last couple of weeks with Deebo Samuel out or limited, George Kittle really has emerged. That will be a must-watch matchup. On the other side of the ball, in looking at San Francisco's biggest weakness by far, how do you see Atlanta attempting to take advantage of San Francisco's biggest weakness, their secondary, especially with Emmanuel Mosley out again this week? Do you think Atlanta will be able to capitalize on that weakness?
Well, the Falcons passing attack has not been the high-flying unit that you would, or at least Falcon fans would want it to be this season. In part, you lose a big element of that in Julio Jones this offseason.
Yep.
You also lose Calvin Ridley, who is, dealing with some mental health issues and has taken a break from football since week 8. And so, you're kind of relying on a rookie in Kyle Pitts, who's been very productive, probably on his way to the Pro Bowl this year. It is in the midst of having a historic season for a rookie tight end, dating back to Mike Ditka was the last time a tight end had better numbers than what Pitts is projecting this year, and that was 50 years ago. So it's a testament to Kyle Pitts that he's playing so well. But at the same time, when you go into these games, you know that he's going to be their go-to guy, and teams have been successful at times when they've been able to focus on him and keep him bracketed and limit his sort of having the high-end impact games that you 49ers fans, I'm sure, are very familiar with George Kittle having these monster games, from time to time, as he's had in some recent weeks. And so you're not really getting that type of performance from Kyle Pitts these last couple of weeks. And then so the Falcons are kind of relying heavily on their other playmakers. Russell Gage has stepped up in weeks. He had a career high day a couple of weeks ago against Tampa Bay, where he had 130 yards receiving, 11 catches. So the Falcons are passing attack. They've been using a lot of sort of 3-by-1 sets and bunch formations because they don't necessarily have the talent at the wide receiver position to basically just win one-on-one. And so they're using some of those route combinations that you can get out of those bunch formations to create openings for this receiver. And it's been effective for Russell Gage over the last month. You're also having impact from Cordarrelle Patterson, the running back out of the backfield, who does split out wide. I'm sure 49ers fans, you see it every week with Deebo Samuel. The Falcons are doing some of the same things with Cordarrelle Patterson, probably not as creative and exotic as some of the things that Kyle Shanahan draws up for Deebo Samuel.
Right.
It's a similar element of what he can do whether it's, catching some of the short stuff or occasionally getting a fade ball down the sideline or whatever the case may be. So the Falcons primarily have been more of a dink and dunk offense. They utilize a lot of play action passing, try to attack the middle of defenses with a lot of crossing routes or whatever the case may be. Some weeks is effective, some weeks is not so effective. So you're getting kind of this inconsistent passing attack. But fortunately for the Falcons, the last couple of weeks, their running game has been working, so they haven't needed their passing attack to carry them as much as they needed it earlier in the season when their running game was one of the worst in the NFL. I think going into this game, while the Falcons do have some weapons like Kyle Pitts and Patterson and Gage that can do some damage, I don't think you have to look at the 49ers secondary weaknesses as a massive liability, given that the Falcons just haven't consistently been able to exploit those in previous matchups against other teams that struggle on the back end.
Well, that's a bit of a relief. And I do think that it sets up slightly favorably for the 49ers, given the thin secondary, in that it seems Kyle Pitts is the most prolific pass catcher on the offense. I saw he's averaging 14 yards per reception, leading in receiving yards. And although Jimmy Ward, our safety, one of our safeties, doesn't get the national acclaim, he really is a very strong man cover guy when it comes to blanketing tight ends. That's really his forte. I would anticipate seeing him matched up pretty much exclusively on Kyle Pitts and Hayden Hurst, depending on how many snaps Hurst is out there. I would think probably more frequently on the athletic Kyle Pitts. I'm a big fan. I write occasionally for the 49ers SI site, and I made an off-the-wall article in the offseason making the case for why Kyle Shanahan might have moved up to 3 to actually draft Kyle Pitts and made the logical argument for adding another offensive weapon. Clearly, I was way off. And before the draft, I predicted that the 49ers would take Trey Lance. I knew it was an outlandish argument, but I made it because he's such a special talent. Hopefully, Jimmy Ward is able to hold him in check, and that would leave the outside threats for Atlanta. Can you talk a little bit about the type of receiver that Russell Gage is? In my research, he seems to be the one that I'm focused on as the potential biggest threat for the 49ers to contain.
Yeah, I mean, the Falcons primarily utilize Gage out of the slot. And as I said, those 3-by-1 sets have been effective at finding ways to get him the ball, particularly on third downs. He's kind of been their go-to chain mover these last
possession receiver.
Yeah, so he's not really a guy that you got to worry about stretching the defense. He's more of a underneath, wins on option routes, in breaking routes, those types of things on the short and intermediate route trees. So he's been effective. The main knock on Russell Gage is sureness of hands. He is known to drop some passes.
Okay.
He had a big fumble a couple weeks ago against Tampa Bay. So it's ball security issues, catching the football that he has been inconsistent up and down. He had 2 drops last week that were almost interceptions by Carolina. So you see good with Russell Gage. You see a mix of bad with Russell Gage. That's one of the reasons why the Falcons don't really have that go-to reliable option. Kyle Pitts, while as good as he has been this year, it just hasn't been sort of, Matt Ryan's basically spent a decade playing with Julio Jones, being that guy where on 3rd and 8, when you need to throw the football and convert, Julio's the guy you go to and you trust down in and down out. And that's really been the core thing that's missing from this Falcons offense. Some weeks you get that from Russell Gage, some downs you get it, some downs you don't. Same thing, that inconsistency with Kyle Pitts. So I think Russell Gage can present some challenges for this 49ers defense, but I think if you can, I don't think you have to worry about him dropping, running past corners for 45-yard bombs or anything like that on a consistent basis.
That's good to know. We absolutely need every advantage that we can get going into this matchup. I'm excited to know that he operates primarily out of the slot because, again, that's a position that the 49ers are a bit more secure in. K'Wan Williams, the Shark, 49er fans know him well. He's a highly capable slot corner. Just bringing in a comment from the chat. Matt Schuh asking, Aaron, can you give some insight just briefly into the criticisms of Coach Shanahan during his tenure in Atlanta as the offensive coordinator? Just shedding some insight into what 49ers fans criticize about him now as a head coach.
Well, yeah, I'm not familiar with 49ers fans' criticism, but the main knock on Shanahan, he came in, had a lot of success early in Atlanta, and a lot of that was basically just get the ball in Julio Jones's hands in that 2015 season. Then Julio Jones had a had some injuries that year and wasn't as reliable a weapon. They were able to lean on the running game quite a bit with Devontae Freeman. Yeah, I think midway through the season, he was either number one or number two in rushing that season. And that led, considerably to, I think, the 6-1, 6-2 start that the Falcons had in that 2015 season with a 5-0 start. And then the running game stopped working. Notably against the 49ers team, a Blaine Gabbert-led 49ers team. That game lives in infamy in my brain because so many things went wrong in that game. Blaine Gabbert beat us. Dan Quinn made some questionable calls in the fourth quarter that I think really cost the Falcons in that game. But I'll be remembering that game alongside Super Bowl 51 on my deathbed about Blaine Gabbert beat us. But
oh man,
but yeah, I think, and then Shanahan, the rest of the season was just kind of mixed. Not a lot of red zone success that season. And then in 2016, they added a couple of pieces: Taylor Gabriel, Aldrick Robinson, Alex Mack, Mohamed Sanu, Tevin Coleman, their rookie in 2015, who didn't have that much impact that year, really made a big step up. And then it would just basically became the Kyle Shanahan that I'm sure 49er fans are very familiar with because they were excited when they hired him to bring some of those same elements. It was a pick your poison type of offense. Okay, you're going to double team Julio Jones. Well, we can find playmakers everywhere with a lot of scheme and a lot of design and whatnot. And so, 2016 was great all the way up until it wasn't great at the very end in February. And basically the criticism of Kyle Shanahan, obviously, I think everybody's familiar with in that Super Bowl game was, his decision to throw the ball instead of running the ball. And playing for a touchdown, trying to sort of put that nail in the coffin rather than playing for the field goal or whatever the case may be. It's been rehashed a million times on Falcons Twitter over the years, so I won't get into it today. But basically my takeaway from that was it was a live by the sword, die by the sword thing. That aggressiveness was what got the Falcons to have historically great offense. And it wound up, costing them at the very end of there. So, I don't know if those are the same issues that the 49ers fans are looking at with Kyle Shanahan now, but, from afar, I would say I think most of their issues are more quarterback related, just the inconsistency at the quarterback position that you didn't necessarily have in Atlanta because you got pretty consistent play, particularly in that 2016 season with Matt Ryan being the MVP. But, I'm sure you guys have a little bit more insight into that.
Yeah, 49er faithful can be unreasonable in their expectations of Kyle Shanahan. Very similar criticisms, though. Definitely the pass happy when the big lead was there in our Super Bowl. That, I think, infuriated 49ers fans. But you tell an interesting story of transition for the Falcons in filling a couple of the key roles that Kyle Shanahan needs in his offense to really take it to the next level. Bringing in Alex Mack, a high-quality center. Adding Taylor Gabriel, a deep threat, someone who can take the top off of the defense. Mohamed Sanu, great possession receiver, 50-50 ball guy. And then Tevin Coleman, right, adding something to the backfield. So I think that explains how it caught fire. And much like you, I have memories of Atlanta games like the 2019 where Julio Jones caught that pass in the end zone and stole that victory away that I still have nightmares about as well. All right, well, one of the guys that we avoided talking about because I knew that we'd bring up this topic in Atlanta's offense is Cordarrelle Patterson. Just in sort of looking at Deebo and Cordarrelle and a bit of their similarities there, both are arguably the most important player on each respective offense. And they have some similarities to their game and to their usage. How would you begin to compare the two?
Yeah, obviously, I'm not as familiar with all the things that the 49ers do with Deebo.
Sure.
Just mostly a lot of highlight stuff. From afar, it looks like the 49ers are probably a little bit more creative with how they get the ball to Deebo, particularly as a running back out of the backfield with some of those end arounds and reverses and whatnot. You're not seeing that same sort of thing. Cordarrelle Patterson has primarily been a traditional running back for the Falcons, although they did run an end around to him. So they're being a little bit more creative with him. They're asking him to run a lot more to the outside where he's been at his best, where his speed and quickness, running some of those toss plays and whatnot with the outside stretch zone from the outside zone blocking scheme that you guys are very familiar with under Kyle Shanahan. So that's been the main way as a running back. So I don't think it's as creative as Kyle Shanahan does.
Sure. That
It's
makes
more of a
sense.
traditional running back. In the passing game, they do like to line him up, particularly now that Calvin Ridley is out of lineup. They do like to get him more involved as a more traditional wide receiver, lining up in the slot, lining up outside, rather than early in the season when it was a lot of stuff out of the backfield. And a lot of his success early in the season was just basically just taking checkdowns and turning them into big plays, and showing that ability to make plays with the ball in his hands that has made him, one of the greatest kick returners in NFL history, and coming out of the backfield and catching those balls and performing stiff arms and just juking guys and turning like a 6-yard throw into a 25, 30-yard gain. And he was doing that quite a bit. We're not seeing as much of that as of late now that he's been a little bit more of a traditional wide receiver, but you're still seeing the hitch routes, the screens. You're still seeing, some of the fade balls. And those are really the ways that Cordarrelle Patterson, it's not like the Falcons are doing too super exotic stuff or creative things. It's just finding easy ways to get him the football, whether that's a screen pass, whether that's a hitch, whether that's a fade ball, just letting him go and make plays. And that's really been the way that the Falcons have been maximizing Cordarrelle Patterson. And he's probably another player that is potentially on his way to a Pro Bowl season this year.
Yeah, I would think so. Anytime you are that percentage of your team's offense, you deserve to make it to the Pro Bowl. There's just no question in my mind. It doesn't surprise me that Atlanta isn't using him as creatively as Kyle Shanahan. I think you probably know from his time as offensive coordinator there, he's probably the most creative offensive mind in the league, and he certainly has been using Deebo in that way. Would you describe Cordarrelle's style as being similar in that Deebo Samuel, when he catches the ball, he's running through defenders, right? He's not going around them. He is going through them. Is it a similar physical playing style?
Yes, it's definitely similar. My brain is going through all the stiff arms and trucks that Cordarrelle Patterson has had this season. So yeah, it's definitely a physical style.
Very nice. Very nice. I'm anxious to see how the 49ers really attempt to contain him. Have defenses been focused on Cordarrelle as the primary engine for the 49ers, for the Falcons offense?
Not particularly. You do see some plays where he seems to get the bulk of the attention with some bracket coverage, but it doesn't seem, from my perspective, to be the main go-to strategy for defenses. I think when it comes, because he's been more of a traditional running back, it's just the same basic things you would do with any running back, stacking the box with, 7 or 8 defenders when that is owed, because you're not necessarily fearful of the Falcons going deep on you in that way. And then as a pass catcher, I think because coverages are being a little bit more geared towards stopping Kyle Pitts, it has allowed Patterson to have a little bit more one-on-one situations. And again, because the Falcons route tree in terms of utilizing him isn't necessarily complex or anything like that, you don't necessarily have to find ways to strategize to slow him down in that regard, and putting more defenders in his direction to try to keep him in check.
Yeah, it would seem that this game sets up for the 49ers to be able to play single high safety and keep players closer to the box and attempt to minimize what Atlanta can do in running the ball and in the short passing game, and really focus primarily on Kyle Pitts as the deep threat. It sets up for the 49ers to really need to rely on Nick Bosa and company and how they attack Atlanta's offensive line. As you look at this being one of the critical matchups for the 49ers being able to slow down your Atlanta Falcons, will Atlanta's offensive line match up well against Nick Bosa and the rest of the 49ers pass rush?
That's going to be the big question, because when this Falcons offense, for the most part, even though they've had struggles in the running game, obviously they're missing key pieces in their passing game, and Matt Ryan has not necessarily played his best football for the majority of the season. A lot of that is tied to their offensive line. When the protection breaks down, it just basically breaks their offense. And so I think this is going to be the key matchup. If Nick Bosa goes off and has a big day, then it's going to be really hard for the Falcons offense to find ways to put points and move the ball and whatnot. And so I think the positive, if you're on the Falcons side of things, And the optimistic viewpoint is you go back to that 2019 game when Nick Bosa was tearing up the league in his rookie season.
Right.
In that game, he did not have a big impact in that. And a lot of that was owed to the fact that Jake Matthews kept him in check in that game. And, that season, Bosa spent the bulk of his time lining up on the right side of the 49ers defensive line, going up against the Falcons left tackle. This year, one of the big changes, and 49ers fans, of course, very familiar with this, that has been talked about over these last 4 to 6 weeks, has been how much Bosa has the flexibility to switch sides. And he's spent the bulk of the production that he's gotten in the last couple of games getting it from the left side of the defensive line going up against the right tackle. That's where the Falcons' weakness is, with Kaleb McGary starting right tackle. McGary's had some good games this year, keeping guys like Chase Young in check. He's done a good job against Shaq Barrett in the 2 Tampa Bay Bucks games, and players like Brian Burns and Hassan Reddick did not necessarily take over either one of those Carolina games. So McGary has done a good job, but there's also been games where he has struggled. He typically struggles against speed. He's not necessarily the most technically savvy offensive tackle, and we know Bosa wins a lot with technique and whatnot. So it's not a great matchup, but one of the ways I expect the Falcons to address it is by consistently trying to give him help. Obviously, because of Bosa's ability to switch sides, that makes it harder to game plan against it. But I think
definitely
the strategy the Falcons will have and consistently have is they typically leave Jake Matthews on an island. And if they have the confidence that he can do when he's lined up against Bosa, when he lines up on that side of the field, that he can do what he did in that 2019 game, they'll be good there. And if they can just consistently have a running back chip or tight end lined up on McGary's side, that will hopefully neutralize Bosa when he's lined up on that side of the field. So that's probably the strategy I would expect the Falcons to employ. Whether that strategy actually works will basically depend on Jake Matthews being able to hold his own on that island. And then obviously, if, as much help as McGary gets, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that he's going to be able to block that guy. So there will be some opportunities, particularly given that the Falcons have not been great against stunts this year. So that will be maybe another strategy that the 49ers can employ that can use some stunts and twists up front to help free up Bosa to make some pressure there.
Great inside information. Absolutely hope that this is what sets up nicely for the 49ers to take advantage. I do think it'll be a key matchup when he's on that left side, the left side of the offensive line up against Jake Matthews, the one-on-one matchup. Is it similar for Atlanta in closing this out? The 49ers are by far better on the left side of the line, and it goes from best to worst going left to right. Obviously, Trent Williams having a phenomenal season. Laken Tomlinson, very, very solid. Alex Mack, good. Daniel Brunskill, questionable. Tom Compton, potentially the worst right guard in the league, especially when it comes to pass blocking. No disparaging him, just acknowledging that he may be 64 out of 64 possible tackles. Is that fairly similar? When I look at the names along Atlanta's line, it seems to be stronger on the left and then weaker as it heads towards the right.
That's not the case. It's more of a mixed bag. Obviously, Jake Matthews has been great in pass protection. Their actual best offensive lineman this season has been Chris Lindstrom, their right guard.
Interesting.
He has been very consistent and effective, although the last couple of weeks he's struggled a little bit. So
I saw that last week against Carolina.
Yeah, so I wonder a little bit, what's going on with him. Maybe he's just in a little bit of a slump. Maybe there's an unreported injury or something like that he's dealing with, or whatever the case may be. So we'll see if he bounces back, but he's been lights out outside of the last 2 weeks this season. So he's really the strength. And, with McGary being up and down, the good thing is that generally speaking, those two, the right side is kind of their strength, just because you have a little bit more consistency from Lindstrom most weeks. And then McGary, while not great, is like kind of just slightly average to above average type of player. Their real weakness up front is their left guard. That's where they have rookie Jalen Mayfield starting. And, you talk about Tom Compton being maybe the worst at his position. Jalen Mayfield for most of this season has been the worst left guard in the NFL. But this past week, against Carolina, he had his best game. He did not give up a single pressure to the Carolina front, and they have some playmakers in that interior with Derek Brown and Daquan Jones, among others. So that's a positive sign that if we can get more of that Jalen Mayfield rather than the guy that has been, kind of a liability for them, that will be a benefit for them, not only this weekend, but in future weekends. The center, Matt Hennessy, has been mostly decent. The last couple of weeks, he rotated with Drew Dahlman, the rookie out of Stanford. largely due to Hennessy potentially struggling in that Patriots game a couple of weeks. He really had trouble with the physical nose tackles that New England has. Then the following week against Jacksonville, they rotated Hennessy and Dahlman looked pretty good in really his first action of the season. And then they did it again against Tampa Bay, and Dahlman struggled. He had a couple of bad snaps, and that led to, okay, they're done with that experiment. And, a lot of people commenting that, what would you expect when you're rotating centers in and out of the lineup every other series? And that's fair. But Hennessy did play well against that Tampa Bay front and looked much better going up against physical players like Vita Vea and Ndamukong Suh.
That's impressive.
2 games. So the Falcons offensive line is basically a mixed bag. It's an up and down thing. You get a really good week from a guy, then you get a really terrible week. And sort of the hope is that, over this final month, we can see a little bit more consistency from all 5 players. It's just been kind of up and down all throughout the year.
Well, I think our hope is that consistency doesn't start this week. I did see the review of Lindstrom in the past game and thereby assumed that he was the more the larger liability. But it's good to know that it's on that left guard spot. It will be interesting to me to see if Eric Armstead lines up over top. He is typically our best interior pass rusher, along with Arden Key coming in with the backup unit. It will be interesting to see which guard they line up, both of them over, and then moving Nick Bosa all around that line. Well, I want to be respectful of your time here. In closing out, what are your thoughts around this game? How do you see it unfolding in a high-level overview?
Yeah, I think, the thing I've said on Locked on Falcons is that if the Falcons try to go blow for blow with this 49ers offense, I think the 49ers clearly have an advantage there. They just have a few more playmakers. They have a creative play caller and whatnot. And despite any concerns that 49ers fans have with Jimmy Garoppolo, given that the Falcons can't pressure the quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo should be fine this week. So I think that's going to be problem for the Falcons if it gets into a shootout and it goes, offense versus offense. So I think the key for the Falcons is basically to do what they've done the last couple of weeks, which maybe get a defensive touchdown on a pick 6, get some turnovers, and maybe get a special teams touchdown. We've seen the 49ers give up some of those to Seattle on a fake punt, the Vikings on a kickoff return. So, maybe this is the week that Cordarrelle Patterson returns to the kickoff game. He's been taking a couple of weeks off, not being the Falcons' primary kickoff returner because he's been dealing with an ankle injury. And so the Falcons are trying to lower his workload in certain capacities there. But this week, he practiced fully on Wednesday after a couple of weeks of getting rest on those days. And maybe that's indicative that the Falcons feel a lot more comfortable giving him a full workload. And maybe this is the game where he has his signature kickoff return for a touchdown, or at least a big play there that can really set up the Falcons into a favorable field position. Although his replacement, Avery Williams, their rookie, has been effective when he's gotten opportunities this season as a kickoff returner. So it's not as if, they have no other options alternative if Patterson is just restricted to being an offensive player. So I think defense and special teams, the Falcons are going to have to hope to get maybe some points there, or at least get some favorable field position provided by some turnovers and some big returns on that phase. And if they can do that, that will probably help them make up the difference that their offense probably alone won't be able to make up, and that will give them a chance to win this game.
That is a very insightful take on it. The 49ers are certainly vulnerable on special teams. They have been wildly inconsistent this year. Part of that is due to considerable injuries on starters, thereby robbing the special teams unit of core players at various points throughout the season. The 49ers are coming back from a big East Coast road trip. They have done horribly coming off of. They've done great on the East Coast, but then in the game returning, they have really struggled. I think it's something around the record of 1-6 after those games. It is atrocious. So if the 49ers come out, start slowly, it will set up for just what you described, where Atlanta with 1 or 2 key plays, whether on defense or special teams, could really make this matchup far closer than one would think when you look at both teams on paper coming into it. I think this has been an incredibly insightful interview that points out my view, which is that the 49ers cannot take this game lightly. Atlanta is recovering from a rough start to the season. The defense seems to be rounding into form. No doubt Matt Ryan is a quality quarterback. He may not have the offensive weapons that you may hope at this point in time, but there are enough against this 49ers secondary to keep us concerned. Aaron, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on here. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, to remind viewers that Aaron runs the Locked On Falcons podcast on the Locked On Podcast network. All of the links are down below. Go follow him on Twitter. Go download that podcast. Like I said, he did a Locked On special this week with Eric Crocker, who we all love, Brian Peacock. It was fantastic. I'm going to go listen to it this afternoon. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me.
Appreciate you having me, Rob.
Absolutely. Until then, 49er faithful, I will be back on at 1:30 with Brad from the SF Niners. Thanks again, Aaron. Until then, cheers, 49er faithful.